arena panels / parties / bonanza, open bar, high school reunion, where we're celebrating not just this incredible issue of Arena Magazine about war, but also this strange era that we have entered, where we seem to be simultaneously rediscovering former era's glory, both in war making and in art. It has become quite obvious to me that these two things are somehow intertwined, but we don't fully understand how. We understand that we're trying to resurrect past eras and how they thought about the world, how they thought about greatness, about defense, about security, about power, and somehow this has an artistic vibe level expression in society, but it also means very concrete things for investment, for technology, for manufacturing. And also about how we think about being Americans or living in America. So this is the second panel, which will be about art. I have a lot of very curious artists on this panel who are wondering about war and who have never before publicly spoken about it. So this is a historic moment. Rohit Krishnan, to start the panel, writer, investor of Strange Loop Canon, and likes to be introduced as my friend, which is so flattering for me, and I don't know if it's flattering for him. Welcome, Rohit. Thank you so much for joining. You're one of the co-masters of the Vibes with a capital V, so we'll see how far we get with that. Audrey Kim of Misalignment Museum and Murphy. Audrey's dog of Twitter fame. Rediscovering and reinventing how people collect art in 2025, and how AI is used both for searching for art and for creating it. So I'm very excited where we will. And I get with that, I have a couple of concrete questions granted. Samuel Burya, who's a needs zero introduction, in Embarcadero of Bismarck analysis, works with Palladium, writes his own pieces as well on his own platform. I think I probably say the live player and that player about 3 times a day. I apologize to my team for this. That comes from this guy. If you feel that your company doesn't have a big enough oral culture, it's because of him. And also one of the people responsible for the renaissance of the great man theory in Silicon Valley. So thank you so much for being here, and other experts and lives. Oh, Murphy, we're not stealing your mom. Separation anxiety. So we resolve this problem. Alice Rubin, thank you so much for being here. Alice is a poet, an athlete, with another incredible Substack, Notes on an Athlete. You're writing currently about the muses and nudes. I'm not sure what's the difference, but this sounds amazing and we want to read both books. And you recently went viral with a piece, very critical, about blend art and a big call for bringing back some of the dark maximalism that makes life worth living aesthetically. My first question after this introduction, first of all, thank you so much for being here. A big applause for my panelists. So I remember 5 years ago when I was under lockdown and the world was blue and gray. Politicians were very boring and in blue and gray. Houses were gray and we were somehow okay with that. And all the tech founders wore gray t-shirts and said very few very interesting things publicly. And then cut to 5 years later, and we seem to be kind of lavishing in a new form of aesthetics. Everybody wants Doric columns, the Catholic revival, rugs, chains around the neck for Carthage to fall. How did we get there?
Is that really happening?
I think so. No?
I'm not sure.
Have you seen A16's new logo? They're going Art Deco.
Maybe something's happening in design. And you told me earlier we might talk a bit about Art Deco, and maybe that logo has an Art Deco influence. Maybe there's something to that. I see, historically I understand Art Deco as a development out of Art Nouveau, which had more organic forms and used wood, and Art Deco does away with that, and everything gets more streamlined and geometric rather than organic. And so I think we want more order, but the right kind of order, and maybe that's happening in aesthetics, that people, they don't want to be controlled more necessarily, but they want everything to be less busy. And but then I also understand Art Deco as, I'm not a Frankfurt School historian. I don't see art as symptomatic of its time, or as just an ideological offshoot of its time. I think it's a lot more, the history of art and design is a lot more complicated than any of these theories would suggest. And Art Deco, to me, I've always understood it as having a lot to do with Egyptology and them discovering, Tutankhamun's tomb and all of that, and things were shiny and golden and topaz and just beautiful, and everyone went mad for it. Rightly, I don't think that means that people in the 1930s started worshipping the sun god. I don't think they had to take on the ideology or the beliefs of the Egyptians in order to start redesigning their cities with more kind of design elements that come from the ancient world. So I think it's very complicated. I'm very reticent to make close associations with any kind of aesthetic or style of when it comes to art that's on a wall or the style of buildings or the rest of it, to tie it too closely to what the vibe is or what the ideology is, which are not always the same thing.
So I have a fundamental hypothesis that most movement shifting art is in fact predicated on tech, and an interesting connection that I see between Art Deco in response to war is that, so prior to Art Deco was Art Nouveau, which is, you think of all the the Parisian metro stations that have these gilded looking flowers, and it's very, very ornate. That genre of art required pretty extreme craftsmanship, and so it's not very scalable. Then when World War I happened, I think the connection there was the result of a lot of the technology that had to get developed for World War I, which was certain metals, certain types of scalable manufacturing. It allowed for the types of aesthetics that you now see in Art Nouveau, or sorry, Art Deco, which is pretty it's not mass produced, but it's it's more mass produced than the single person who's gilding the little flower. And so, in fact, I would say Art Deco is one of the genres of art that had a pretty direct relationship to war. And then I think another way that we can connect, so it's separately.
So just to go back to it, it's also it's much more aggressive. No, Art Deco is very much about victory, and you have Mucha and Art Nouveau are kind of hedonistic. And there's a girl who's naked and has absinthe, and she's not going to war. She's not going to manufacture ships. but what happens in Art Deco, that seems much more promising in that regard.
Yeah, and I think, so this is kind of a jump, but then going back to my thesis about art being predicated on tech, a lot of other types of art, and I think part of the fascination that we're seeing with something like Art Deco now, I wonder if it's also related because it is so much, the lines and the aesthetics of Art Deco would not have been possible without the tech that was developed in World War I. And I think when we're thinking a lot about AI art or people in tech who are now being really fascinated by certain types of art, it's there is, similar to photography, which created a whole new genre of art. We're at the precipice, or we're actually is the center right now of a totally different new possible meaning of art being created. So I would say there's probably some like subconscious thing there. I would like to think so.
Wonderful. Hopefully this works. You know, Audrey, I love your insights. I might have to partially disagree. And my disagreement would be in the space of like architecture and fashion, right? Where I think victory inspires imitation. So while we might not, we think of war as this like, ugly, bad thing, and in fact is ugly and bad, but so much of our world that surrounds us was fundamentally shaped in war. And when it comes to victory and war inspiring imitation, sometimes the imposition of, say, architecture is pretty direct. It's not like Eastern Europe decided it liked socialist realism. Yet an archaeologist or art historian, exactly someone did, right? The Russians, right? The Soviet Union decided that that's what you would like. And the bomber jacket is cool, but it's cool because it's a jacket of like, people that flew planes that dropped nuclear weapons and dropped, firebombs and all of that stuff. That's the reason it's cool. People like winning. People like victory, both voluntarily and also aesthetics are imposed top down.
So I think a counterpoint to that, which it's still related to war, of course, and related to power, but like what Hitler was very into neoclassicalism, and he considered Greek and Roman aesthetics to be like of the pure like representation of humans that he was saying a lot of the like Jewish artists or other artists that they considered degenerate were corrupting. And so in fact I would say there's a direct link to, so in America, abstract expressionism, this whole genre of art was very tied to the American CIA wanting to have a culture battle. There was something called, so the CIA was started, I think 1947, is that correct? You would know better than me. And underneath that, they created something called the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And that was where it was very much in bed with like the Rockefellers who were connected to the MoMA, the Whitney, who was connected to Whitney Museum. And so we were having things like Jackson Pollock pieces or Picasso, like all of these pieces that were getting funded, in fact, by American taxpayer dollars, because it was part of a propaganda agenda to try to demonstrate to the cultural elite in like Europe and Russia that America was this like land of free expression. And so it was in fact an attempt to be exactly counter to things like the social realist or the Russian,
the Russian style, yes,
Russian style,
exactly.
It sounds like you hate artists. Or you think,
no, not at all.
Or you think artists are just, they would be hired by anyone to do anything.
So in fact, I would say that, it's just, sorry, I feel like I'm like, actually. But in fact, like historically, a lot of art was patroned by like what was like religion or aristocracy.
But you're talking specifically about Abex painters, and you're saying abstract expressionism. Because it was funded by the CIA, it was a...
So abstract expressionism, I would say, like, these artists and modernist artists actually they already existed. And this genre, for example, Picasso was one of the first artists that was like, okay, so let me give some, just like give more nuance, but like this genre of art was already in existence, or it was already developing into existence. However, the support of it and the acceleration of it was very tied with the CIA at that time. I'm not saying all modern art, but specifically abstract expressionism. And I think the counter thing here is like the whole point for that was that it was supposed to be, these artists didn't know that they were being patroned by the CIA. In fact, they're like, oh, I have this great show. So it's like part of that agenda that America had was to frame this type of art as the anti-fascist art. And in fact, that's also why Picasso had a show in America pre-World War, or when did he have his first show? 1929, I think. And his first show was successful, but it wasn't like super successful. It only became like lightning in a bottle when there was a lot of narrative around Picasso's art being anti-fascist because he was part of the degenerate art show at the Nazi site.
I think actually there's maybe more agreement there than it seems. Because we're talking about art being anti-something, right? Whether that's, it can be a horrible example of a fascist dictator kind of dumping out abstract art because it's the kind of urban, Berlin, gay, fun, forward-thinking movement, and let's bring back the columns. Or it can be, you know, a liberal democracy's supported revolt against communist uniformity. I mean, there is that's why we do art, right? To say no to things the best way we can. And so when we're talking about it, and I do think that the AI thing here is very, very important. And one of the reasons why suddenly Baroque maximalism is trending on Twitter is because without the Art Nouveau craftsmanship of somebody in Paris in 1910, you can actually create these incredibly beautiful images in 10 minutes, right, or less. It started with Midjourney, basically. And it did rewrite the visual aesthetics of tech. I mean, when I went into tech, which now seems like 500,000 years ago, that was not at all the visual language. And it kind of, people who know me might know that I'm not the biggest Harari fan in this world, but he did say one good thing, which was that, you know, and he said this in like 2014, that a tech, a very powerful tech leader will be in a blue t-shirt without any jewelry because he really has power versus a medieval king who had to wear all his regalia, his crown, his golden shit, because he didn't really have power. He was feuding with the feudal lords of next door and a little roundhouse. So I'm really curious what you guys think about conspicuous power and the fact that we are returning to an aesthetic and a communication of power that shows itself, that shows its violence, it wants to show its beauty, it wants to be beautiful. I do think that that's a vibeshift if I see one.
I mean,
he has a Windows phone. Just saying before he says.
Before we go any further, I had a Windows phone. I still think it was a good idea.
Contrarian, we wanted a contrarian.
If only they had made a better phone, I might still have one, which kind of says it all. Just admit, I don't know, I feel like there's 4 or 5 different conversations going on simultaneously here. So, just to kind of go a little bit in order from my head. Art has always had a fascination with victory in some sense, to your example. Like, why wouldn't it? Everything else in the world has a fascination with it, so it would be really weird if art was somehow, you know, immune to anything that actually came from this.
And war too. War is a great subject for art.
I think for the majority of our human history, war was pretty much a normal occurrence that happened at regular intervals. Again, it would be really weird if it didn't have some impact. And almost everything we refer to here as classical architecture or art kind of means Greco-Roman classical architecture and art. And Greco-Romans, when they built, kind of thought about the Mycenaeans, and they actually kind of talked about the Phoenicians. They talked about the Egyptians. I mean, we just had a new pope, and if you went to Vatican, you will see a big-ass obelisk that sits right in the middle of, like, there is this lineage where you try to build upon what came before and try to get referred prestige from that. And sometimes you try to break it, and people try to break it in all sorts of different ways, whether it's through abstract expressionism, whether it's through art deco, whatever it might be, to take what existed before and try to build something on top of it. New forms of technology allows you to do that a bit better than what you could before. All the usual examples of photography or whatever it might be. So that kind of exists. The tech aesthetic part is slightly different, I feel. I mean, I don't remember the 90s all that well. I'm not that old yet. But one interesting observation is that at least during the 2010s, which is kind of when tech really came into its own and became a big sort of cultural.
Sorry guys in the back, I can't hear my own panelists. Thanks. Even though he's speaking up to a mic.
In 2010s, like tech became synonymous with, I don't know, like software. for lack of a better word, right? I always used to find it weird that we would think about Microsoft as a tech company, but Exxon not as a tech company, or Boeing not as a tech
This is
company.
what Ginevra was also
Yeah,
talking
like in the
about,
previous
yeah.
panel. So now it is just kind of, to me, it's a little bit of a flip back to the previous era. Tech kind of started dressing like, most of us do, slightly shabbily. I'm looking at you, Samuel. Thank you for, being on my side.
I'm representing the
Thank you.
founders,
Yeah.
fighting the East Coast
Fighting the
still. You fight the previous war, right?
You fight the previous
Okay,
war.
because
It's not over. It's
to
radical.
say something, the point about ostentation, maybe Robert already got that wrong.
I
Because
hope so,
in
because
the-
I hate to be agreeing with
Because
the
in the
guy.
English Civil War, there was the colorful side, the Cavaliers who wore swag. They had aura. They were aura fountain, right? And the other side, they wore drab, black suits. Sounds familiar?
Precisely.
They were farming victory, right? That's what they were farming, and that's why the whole Western world wore the suit until the main way to make money ended up being something, someone wearing a T-shirt.
Correct.
Right?
I mean, it was a conscious choice to kind of wear a T-shirt and kind of stand apart when you were in the West Coast. And now that you've done that for a while and you've generated all this power for yourself, if you want to stand out, you can't wear a T-shirt because everybody else wears a T-shirt, so you might want to go get a gold chain. It makes sense to me.
I'm from the Balkans. I can't get over how the gold chain was. It reminds me too much of Albania and so on.
There's a reason I'm not wearing one, but I get it.
When did technologies become, and whether that's Exxon technology, whether that's UAL technology, when did technologies become tastemakers? I think that's rather new. At least to be doing it publicly with regard to art purchases, artistic trends. Is that just coming from something that comes from AI art?
I don't think they are.
They are not?
No. I mean, if you think
I'm not
about the
saying
previous
good
gen-
taste, but a taste.
Not really. I mean, the closest is perhaps we might read books that you might say, oh, Mark Andreessen recommended something, so maybe we should read it. That might exist, but no. Like I cannot think of one place where they are. Think about the previous generation. Like there's Carnegie Hall, Rockefeller.
Yeah.
Like we had actual, real tastemakers who used to be industrial giants. I don't think tech is anywhere close to that.
What do they need to do to get close to that?
I think that Carnegie Hall might be nice. I mean, if you're going classical, but
They do have Burning Man.
true.
Right, that is their fault, and it has clearly shaped consumer aesthetics. Like you go to a festival now, all festivals are imitating this sort of crystallized, kind of static Burning Man uniform that's not really changed in 2010. So I think that is a case where fashion was driven by, tech.
Was Carnegie Hall venerated in its time that it was created, or is that something that we've given value to in hindsight?
It was kind of built for an existing new wave of artists. Tell us more about that.
The incentives were different then. That was a different generation of industrialists and entrepreneurs who felt that, you might as well give directly to your local space. There was a sense of felt ownership for the cities that they lived in. They wanted to beautify those cities and facilitate cultural life there. And I think maybe here, our basic assumptions in tech are that in theory, it doesn't matter where you live. That's why it took tech so long to focus on the city politics of San Francisco. And tech was kind of bullied into this by the rest of the world. It was embarrassing to go to certain cities and say you're from San Francisco. When I would talk to my New York friends, they'd be like, it's so dirty, it's so dangerous, it's so criminal. My best report was to look them in the eye and say, yeah, you have to be pretty tough to live there, right? And then, of course, the New Yorkers' soul died because they were Disneyland compared to us, circa pandemic years.
Would you guys say there are certain types of monuments similar to Carnegie Hall that exist in the digital world?
I think for a certain value of monuments, yes, but not similar, right? I think one of the pushes of going into the software world, as tech world is considered software world despite the previous panel for the majority of people, is that you are placeless. You're not rooted in a particular place, right? I mean, as a consequence, I don't know, maybe you could consider Apple's new headquarters, something similar to that, but it's not publicly accessible or available for the most people to actually enjoy. If it was a bit more like Smithsonian, it would be nice.
But don't you think this, is it possible that the rootlessness is an excuse for not wanting to give money away rather than invest it? The patrons gave, they just spent the money on building things.
I don't fully think so.
The Morgan Library is a public institution. You don't have to pay to go there.
No, the reason I don't think so is like, I think they were following the footsteps of like the Medicis where, you know.
Totally.
Whereas,
And to that point, I was going to say earlier, the industrialists of the American industrialists of the 19th century knew their history a lot better
correct.
than the very rich people today.
I think tech is
And
very
they understood that in the Renaissance, supporting the artists was a way to, but had multiple functions. I mean, it created a legacy for them. The Medicis are not just remembered as bankers. I mean, most people remember them as art patrons rather than bankers, most normies do. But the arts served all different kinds of functions too. I mean, it made Florence a city that exists in the state it does today because it never was bombed. On both sides of every war that was fought in Italy since then, it was agreed that the city is too beautiful, no matter which side you're on, to touch it. And so it was turned into a place that it didn't matter, you know, whether you could bomb everywhere else, but you would leave Florence behind. I mean, it was something that was
Rome is an open city.
They understood that it was too beautiful to not be preserved for everyone. And I don't think they were thinking about that when they built Florence in the 15th and 16th centuries. But we've learned that lesson now. And I'm with Petrov on this. I mean, I see these Twitter accounts that have so many followers, and they drive me. They're all muted now, but and they post the same things over and over. It's like a lot of Bernini, and the caption is, "Why don't we do this anymore?" And I always think, we never did it. Bernini did it. Do you know?
Like 22.
Do you know anything about Bernini? And this is because they're not
just do things.
Yeah, but they don't know the history. They don't know. They like how it looks. They like that it's lasted. They like that it's solid. They like that it's beautiful. But the Renaissance didn't happen because of aesthetics. It happened because they went back to the classical world. They translated the stuff. They read it. They rediscovered humanism. You know, it was a massive, unprecedented cultural movement that wasn't just vibes and aesthetics.
But to say one thing here about the incentives, and I, by the way, do agree that it is incumbent on any wealthy class in society to support philosophy, culture, art, and that ideally they should have good taste. Well, I think we should remember the incentives are radically different today than in the era of Carnegie Hall. We have a situation where if Mark Zuckerberg gives money to a literal hospital here in San Francisco, he will only receive bad press for it. And that in fact happened. And there was even a resistance to name the hospital, even colloquially after him. So that's very different than 100 years ago. Why is Stanford called Stanford, right? Why do we have so many beautiful things here in San Francisco? Because we once were willing to credit the patron together with the artist. And today, while we're still willing to credit the artist, at least if the artist pretends that they don't believe they're a genius, which is a lie. All artists believe they're geniuses secretly. They just have to show humility now. We do not credit those who support it. Like if we created a big public statue that was funded, and it could be a modernist statue that was funded by, I don't know, Elon Musk, and put it on Alcatraz instead of putting a prison there, have like a giant statue there, I think this would be so negative for him. People might be so angry. Like today, we live in a world where we are happy when rich people spend money on yachts. We pretend to critique them, but you never get in trouble we're living it up as a rich person. You spend $50,000 in an election, or $50,000 on a book, or $50,000 on creating a new, actually controversial artwork. I mean, come on, that's not even the hors d'oeuvres on a super yacht.
I know.
We actually want to defang money in society very fundamentally. We don't let them play with it or do anything that matters. So of course they do only the stuff that doesn't matter.
Just to relate a little bit of that back to the historical analogy, you're right, and to be fair, you were talking before about rootlessness. There was so much civic pride in Florence, and you needed that civic pride. And funnily enough, they were really proud because of war, because they were always at war with the other city-states of Italy and France and the Empire and Spain. They were being attacked all the time, and war, it's not, I'm going to say arguably, not even arguably, wasn't the only necessary condition, but it created a condition of in which Florentines were very, very proud of where they lived, and they wanted to do everything they could for their city, to make their city the best. And they were being attacked constantly, and Leonardo, when he was coming up in it's also really hard to make these historical analogies because artists are such different figures now than they were historically. Leonardo, when he was young, was in Florence. He was very ambitious, and there were older artists who got all the good commissions, and so he decided to try and get a new patron. The Duke of Milan, it seemed like he wanted some artists around, he needed stuff building, and Leonardo wrote the greatest ever letter of self-recommendation. I don't know if you guys know about it. You should look it up, it's incredible. We have it, thankfully. It's like one of these rare documents that we have. And he just wrote to the Duke of Milan and said, you should hire me, and it was to be a court artist, but the entire letter is about how he could build self-destructing bridges and other different kinds of weapons of mass destruction for Milan to defend itself against the other cities that were attacking it. And at the very end of the letter he says, oh, by the way, I can paint anything you want to paint and sculpt anything you want to sculpt, and I'm captain and all the rest of them. The whole letter was about how he was an engineer and could do great things for the city. So pride is a really big part of this, and having the support of the citizenry for which people to be spending money. That's all so skewed now. People in the arts hate people in tech. You know, the last thing they want to do is give them any credit for anything. That's going to have to change.
How did the patrons of people like Da Vinci gain their wealth? And how is that different from wealth that we're seeing
They
today?
were the bankers. They invented it all. They invented capitalism. That was what happened in Florence. I'm not.
They invested in art that celebrated them and got them into heaven, right? I mean, there's a reason why. I mean, imagine an artwork today where Elon Musk is included amongst the angels praying, which is basically what Florence was about. They were not shy about it.
One thing I want to go back to about tech people supposedly not patroning artistic stuff. I think part of the reason, and I don't think that's true, but second to that, the other parts that could be true about that, I think it's partially also because a lot of the money that tech people have that they've gained, rather than just like spending it on the yacht or like patroning some like painter man, they're actually like angel investing. And in fact, that's where this money is going to, and I think that framing, I see a lot of parallels between tech and startup founders and artists. They're just like both creators, but different mediums and generally like different like main direction. But this idea, like I don't know any angel investor who's like expecting all of their companies to succeed. And many times they're investing in something that they're like, I think this is going to be a net positive for the world. It's probably going to die. It's going to contribute to some really great research for humanity. And so I think a lot of that like philanthropic patronage is also getting directed to angel investing.
Maybe just one comment is that I find it I've got two comments. One is, it's really interesting that it turns out to be bankers who have really good artistic sense. I just like that because I know a bunch of bankers. And the second part is that
Introduce them to me.
I don't think the current ones really do.
Probably one of the most. He's like a matchmaker service.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, every now and again, right, I hear from a friend, poet friend or a visual artist who has something happened and they got some exposure on social media, and then very rich people reached out to them and they want a return on investment. This is the difference. They want to invest in them.
Yeah.
And that's a very different relationship. I mean, it's one thing to commission a work, but it's another thing to say, I'm going to give you this money, but then I want a cut of it somewhere down the line. It's a very different expectation being put on the artist, and the art world needs to change.
But
In lots of different ways, but I don't know if this is a model that's good.
I'm just saying that, like, if you were to calculate ROI in terms of, when you sell a piece, I want to get a cut, versus when you become great, I want to be known as a person who funded you, that's an equally valid ROI. I wonder why, I'm sure the second one kind of also exists. My hypothesis is that tech as an industry has become very rich very recently. Like it's in the last 15 years, right? When I think Gates retired and started sort of deciding to give off his wealth, he was worth much, much less than what he's today. And that's after he has given out $100 billion. So I think the numbers have gotten astronomical so fast. And if I look at the last few years, at least in the online world, you hear interesting. You hear people, Nat doing the Vesuvius scrolls. Like you're starting to see the emergence of some bits of work in corners where they're trying to do weird and crazy things.
That's the most incredible project. I'm so excited by it.
So it might just be that tech needed a bit of time to grow up.
It might be like our Tutankhamun moment, depending on what they find. The implications of just that project alone might be huge for the arts and philosophy.
That's going to be our cue, guys, because we've run out of time. This also means that the questions, if there are from the audience, you can ask them at the bar or over the food. We are going to pass on the mic back to Max so that we can wrap up the Interintellect part of the event. Romit, Audrey, Samo, Alice, thank you so much. And now comes the party. Invest in art, but also buy art and make art. That's my takeaway.